OPAL, Organization for Positive Action Leadership, is a non-profit founded by citizens in the Evanston Black community in 2014 who are concerned about the underlying issues that cause the achievement gap. OPAL continues to be run by citizens, most of whom don't have children in Evanston schools. OPAL's mission is to achieve racial equity in Evanston through advocacy, voter education, civic engagement, and candidate development. OPAL pursues its objectives publicly and through private advocacy. Not all of OPAL's accomplishments are made public. This past fall, OPAL interviewed all the candidates we were able to contact and who were willing to participate. Tonight, we're using the webinar format so audience members will see only the moderator and the candidates. We have a limited number of audience slots in Zoom. So if you can view the form using Facebook Live at the OPAL Facebook page, we would appreciate your logging off Zoom and logging into the Facebook instead. OPAL received audience questions in advance at our webpage. Because time is limited, we won't be taking additional questions during tonight's event. After the forum, we will provide the questions we didn't get to the candidates who may answer them on their own platforms. The recording of tonight's forums will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel. Tonight's moderator, I'm happy to introduce Evanston attorney and OPAL board member Janitha Shambi. She will be the moderator this evening. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question, and there will be a 1-minute warning, and after the 2-minute warning, the candidates should finish the thought. Janitha?
Thank you, Roger. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the OPAL Candidates Forum for the Alderperson's position. I just want to give a special thank you to all the candidates attending the forum this evening. We understand that there are some that were not able to attend. We are grateful for all of you who are virtually observant as well. In tonight's forum, we have candidates for the wards 4th, 6th, and 7th. We have approximately 4 questions for tonight's candidates. Again, as stated earlier, they will have 2 minutes to answer a question with the 1-minute warning, and then a warning at 2 minutes to wrap it up. The timer will indicate on the screen that your time is up. It is incumbent upon you, all the candidates, to adhere to the time constraints. We want to have a fluid question and answering process, and I will rotate the order for the responses. So now we'll begin with the questioning. In our current form of government, what is your role in holding the city manager accountable? We'll start with candidate Goldring.
Hi, thank you. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to Ms. Shambi and Mr. Williams and everybody seen and unseen at OPAL. It's very difficult to put these together, and we really appreciate it. In our current form of government, the city manager, as everybody knows, reports to the mayor and the city council. So it is absolutely our role to hold the city manager accountable. And to do that, we need to have really very clear expectations and goals for the city manager that the city manager, in a public process for what those goals are. And that's how we would hold them accountable. We have goals and measures. It's just like in any kind of company where you have a boss and you set goals and you have performance reviews and you publish them through the regular process. We would publish the goals and okay, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Nusma.
Thank you. As Diane expressed, thank you to Ms. Shambi and all the other folks at OPAL for putting on these events. I guess we're almost at the end now, so thank you for your time. So to answer the question, I think the city manager has one of, if not the toughest job in local government. Long hours, thankless job. When things go right, the city manager doesn't get any credit. When things go wrong, the city manager hears it from all sides. So whoever has that job, has my sympathy, because it's certainly a tough one. I think the analogy of the city manager as the CEO of the city and with the city council as a board of directors is imperfect. It's close, but imperfect, because the city of Evanston is not out to make money for its shareholders, but to support the well-being of the citizens of Evanston. So in order to hold the city manager accountable, the first thing we need to do is hold the city council accountable through accessibility, through engagement, and through transparency. And in terms of the direct supervision of the city manager, clear communication of goals and expectations are essential, with defined and measurable targets. And I totally understand that not every objective is easily quantifiable. But to the extent possible.
Thank you. Candidate Trippi.
Hi, thank you so much for this opportunity tonight. It's nice to see you, Janitha. I would say that my predecessors have said a lot. The current form of government that we have calls for the city manager to be responsible to the mayor and the city council, but also to be the CEO of the city and manage all of the city employees, and thereby being responsible to the citizens of Evanston as well. It is a tough job, and it's important that the city manager understand the expectations of this city and the code of conduct that we expect, the civility that they must treat the citizens of Evanston and the city council and the mayor with. It's a hard job, and I really respect the people who choose to take it on and serve this city.
Thank you. Alderman Sufferton.
Thank you for the question. First, I want to say we had a process where the city manager was hired. I know this organization took a position on it. I was pretty clear that I thought the process was less than ideal. So when I answer this question, I want to be clear that I'm talking about the role of city manager and not the current city manager, who I think deserves a chance to be successful. One of the first things that this next mayor and council should do is lay out what our priorities are, and not in a way that we're looking to put another poster on the Civic Center wall, but some real actionable, measurable objectives for the next 4 years. I think that's important. I think that when we look at where we are in terms of our collective bargaining agreements and post-pandemic recovery, a 4-year time frame is reasonable to expect certain things to be achieved. The reality is, the way that this form of government set up, the city manager makes all the decisions after the city manager is hired. So in terms of holding them accountable, the best way to do it is to be very clear on what our objectives are and how we're going to measure them, and make sure that we have a time frame and that they're actionable. Because in reality, especially with the rules that this council adopted, it's very difficult to remove a city manager. So the threat of job loss is off the table, particularly with some of the contractual provisions. So in order to hold the city manager accountable, the number one thing this mayor, next mayor, and next city council can do is make it very clear very early what our expectations are for the next 4 years, have them be measurable, and have there be accountability periodically as we go through. At 6 months is an appropriate time to see where we're making progress towards our goals.
Thank you. Alderwoman Revel.
Well, good evening, and thank you very much to OPAL for this opportunity to talk with residents about really important issues facing our community. I think I agree with a lot of what my colleagues here on the panel have said about the role of the city council in holding the city manager accountable. One thing I would add is we have really high expectations of our city government and the city manager in meeting those expectations. And in particular, we demand a really customer service approach from our staff members in terms of how they deliver services. And so I think one of the roles of us as aldermen is relaying to the city manager what we're hearing from our residents about whether the services are being provided in a way that is meeting their needs, and what other kinds of issues should the city manager be addressing. As all of us on the city council have regular meetings with the city manager to keep abreast of new developments and to share our concerns that we're hearing from our constituents. And I think that's a very important piece of the way we hold our city manager accountable. But certainly setting goals and measurable outcomes is a really important part of that as well.
Thank you. Candidate Rosinski.
Hi, thank you for everything also. It's nice to be last because you can say I agree with all of them, because I think it's so important in our city manager form of government. One of the things, in addition to the setting the culture and working with the council to establish those goals and measurements in a collaborative way, I think we also need to set an expectation of financial responsibility to say when the council, if things are getting to be beyond where our budget is or where our finances are, or if something is unusual happening, I expect a lot of honesty and just say, hey guys, you know, this is a great idea, but it really doesn't fit into what we had said with our budget or our strategic plan or elsewhere. So I think everything else has been said, and I do agree with it. Measurable goals set the stage for how we're going to work with residents and held accountability. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna direct questions to specific wards. I'm gonna start with the 6th ward. What are your plans to address recent racially motivated crimes in the area and underlying racial tension? I'll start with Alderman Suffredin.
Thank you. And I'm going to presume that that question is relating specifically to the vandalism of the sign at Northminster Church. I've spoken with the church about what they might want to do in terms of making a statement similar to the statement that the neighbors made in response to the sign vandalism, where they brought their own signs to amplify the message that the vandal was trying to silence. And so one of the things that we talked about possibly doing was creating an honorary street name on Central Park there. Now that's a symbolic gesture. The tangible gestures are, we need to, first off, increase security. It's clear that this is something that is repetitive. It's been happening on Saturday nights. So we worked with the police on what to do about actually catching the person or people that are doing this. In terms of other things that we can do, I think that the community made it very clear that that act of vandalism and what it represented was not welcome here. And so in terms of that's really the only crime like that we've had here. We've had sign vandalism in the past with Black Lives Matter yard signs. But in terms of the actual recent acts of vandalism, the main one is the Northminster Church. And I'm also hopeful that we'll have increased surveillance and be able to catch whoever is doing it.
Thank you. Candidate Trippi?
Sure. I would say that the racial tensions and the violent acts that have happened recently in our neighborhood are indicative of the terrible national leadership that we've had for the last 4 years, and the acts of violence, and particularly racial violence, have been they've become almost normalized, and that cannot be. That is not acceptable in Evanston. It's not acceptable in the 6th Ward. And I was heartened by the response of my neighbors, immediately decrying the vandalism that took place at Northminster. But there have been other incidents. There have been incidents in our elementary schools. It is something that our society has to grapple with. And the pandemic and the racial injustice in our country have been amplified and laid bare some of the ugliest aspects of our society. We as leaders in this city have to take a stand and say this is not acceptable.
Thank you. I'm going to direct my questions over to the 7th Ward. What is your plan for canal shores in Harley Clark, given the deficit? We'll start with candidate Rosinski.
I think both of those public assets can be great economic generators for the Evanston budget. So I think we've had shown, I think there's been a number of, well, not a number, there's been hundreds of residents who have come together to preserve those two facilities and public assets. So I would work with them and let them go about helping, getting their fundraising and encourage them and make it a community-wide effort to use them, make them accessible to not only our Evanston community, but also economic generators that'll bring people in from other communities to use them, spend their tax dollars here, go to our restaurants, support Evanston, and then they can go back home. So I would be wanting to preserve both of those. I think that's very important. And I think there's a lot of community energy that wants to keep those assets. So they're valuable, and being in real estate, you don't sell your most valuable assets. You make them work for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Revo.
Yes, I agree that these are wonderful community assets, and I see them as positives for economic development and support of the city. We're about to make a decision about what the future of Harley Clark. We've received 4 proposals, and it's the city staff is evaluating those and going to be presenting some information for the city council so we can make a decision and move forward and really begin to bring that wonderful building back to life. So I do think it not only will be a wonderful benefit for the community as a whole, but as Mary indicated, it can be certainly something that brings in outsiders into Evanston as well. With Canal Shores, they have in the last few years had to really strengthen their board of directors and embarked on a really aggressive in a good way, ecological restoration plan to restore the habitat along the canal banks. And that's going to be increasingly attractive for people to come and walk on the paths and bird watch and things like that. They're also looking for ways to take more advantage of the patio and the building there at the pro shop, which can also be a money generator for Canal Shores. They are really pressed to raise the funds they need to maintain that property, and we need to provide as much support as we can to help them do the kinds of work that they can do and really make this a thriving community golf course with accessible rates and a wonderful outreach program for youth in the community.
Thank you. I'm going to direct my question over to the 4th Ward. Given the frustration regarding Crown, how will you move forward to improve community engagement overall and increase the usage of Crown by all? We'll start with candidate Nusma.
Thank you for the question, Junitha. Robert Crown really is a great community asset. but let's be honest, it cost a whole lot of money, and I think represents a lost opportunity for public engagement. So I view Robert Crown through, from two different perspectives, and I'd rather look forward than backward. So in terms of community engagement, as an alderman, being accessible, being engaged, and being transparent is kind of the baseline expectation for building relationships which allow trust to be developed between the residents of the community and their elected officials. And that involves bringing people to the table who need to be a part of the conversation and might not be the ones who always show up for a meeting, but need to be brought to the table. And so as an alderman, I would be committed to being accessible, being engaged, and being transparent, so we can develop relationships, build trust before there's a controversial issue, whether it's Robert Crown, whether it's a development, whether it's something else, so that when an issue comes up of concern to various people, we can have a more productive and fruitful and civil conversation about it, because there's already a relationship and already a level of trust.
This is admin interjecting just for 1 second, so you all know that her name is pronounced Junitha, so that we can get that right moving forward.
Junitha.
Thank you. Candidate Goldring.
Thank you. Robert Crown has caused a lot of anger in the community at large, because it is just it's so much debt service, and it is about one of the more inequitable projects that the city has done in a long time, with $60 million or whatever it ultimately ended up costing. So it is, at this moment, it is a huge asset to the community, in that it's got, gyms and places to play, for people to play. But overall, it was a disaster in terms of community engagement. What I would do differently is really try to, I would reach out a lot more to the community and bring them involved, have them become more involved in the process of developing Robert Crown, or any community asset, like any development that's going on in the ward. We need to have regular ward meetings. That's something, as I've been canvassing around, people are just, they don't even know who their alderman is at this moment. And they have said that they would absolutely attend ward meetings. And people who can't attend ward meetings, and we'd have to go meet people where they're at, go out and talk to them in their own community organizations, write newsletters. There's some good old snail mail. There's people who don't have computers and don't have access they can't actually come to meetings, so we can actually mail them. And in terms of having Robert Crown, the one thing about Robert Crown that is positive is it's in the center of the city, but we need to make some of the programs there, sliding scale, reduce the cost. Hockey isn't exactly a sport that a lot of people play, so thank you.
Thank you. This question is for all the candidates. What sources of information will you use to make decisions? We'll start with candidate Nusma.
Thank you. One particular source of information that I think is underutilized within the current structure of the city government is the residents of the community that are represented on the various boards, commissions, and committees, or the BCCs. I'm speaking from my experience, having served 2 terms on the city's utilities commission. which is comprised of engineers and some lawyers and some finance folks, people who have some technical expertise having to do with water and sewer and electricity, the Utilities Commission. Had the utility been consulted on technical issues, or for that matter, had the appropriate city staff been contacted regarding technical issues surrounding the James Park litigation several years ago, the city would not have spent either $6 million or $8 million, I'll say $6 million to be conservative, on an ill-fated lawsuit that was bound to go nowhere. We could have saved that money and avoided that cost if the proper experts had been consulted. So I will build on that experience as aldermen look to not only the boards and commissions and committees that include residents who have expertise that I can benefit from. I will also rely on the city staff who have technical knowledge and are, have great experience in so many different areas of importance. So those are just two examples.
Thank you. Alderman Suffredin.
Yeah, thank you. And just really quickly, I'd like to point out that many of the issues that we're talking about here, Harley Clark, Robert Crown, the James Park litigation, one of the underlying issues with all those, and Robert Crown, not a bad thing, James Park lawsuit, not a good thing, and Harley Clark to be determined. But one of the big issues is that they spread across two councils. So I want to point out that's one of the things I'm talking about when I say holding the city manager accountable and making sure that when the new council and mayor come in, that we set our priorities for 4 years and that they're achievable within that term and that time frame. Not everything will be, but the things that we're talking about here, I think one of the problems is they stretched across multiple councils. In terms of getting information, we're very reliant on staff reports. And I think that to Jonathan's point, we should be less reliant on staff and more reliant on volunteer board and commissions to vet some of the things that come before council. I think we can do a better job of setting up our calendar where we have more time between committee and full council for there to be an opportunity for members of the community to really see what's going on and poke holes in things or ask tough questions that need to be asked. In terms of sources of information, one of the criticisms that my colleagues, and I'll even admit, I've said it too, is that we get repetitive people at public comment, but you have to rely on the people who show up. You can't say that you are certain there are other people who feel differently and you wish they would show up. The residents who show up are the ones you need to count on. And I think one of the advantages of us all getting more comfortable with technology is there's a lot less friction in creating meetings than there were when we have to go to a fixed place. So one of the other sources of information that I will really seek is input from the larger community, not just my ward, the city. I think that we can do a really good job of getting people together to get their opinions out there before we make big decisions that affect everybody over a long period of time.
Thank you. Candidate Rosinski. You're muted.
Could you repeat the question? I apologize.
Sure. What sources of information will you use to make decisions?
Okay. I think, yes, the boards and commissions are really important because they are our Evanston residents who are giving their time. And I think all those boards should be filled. For the last 4 years many of them have been unfilled. Second of all, I think that we need to reach out earlier ahead of time to other people in the community. Our city is made up of thousands of people who have experts in many areas. And we could, if we let them know what's going on, we can actually get some good input. I think on a ward level, I think it's being accessible. Oh, okay, I see it's done. It's being accessible to your ward people for input.
Thank you. Alderwoman Revelle.
Thank you. Well, I agree that we should be, that one really important source of useful information does come from our boards and commissions. A couple of the boards that I rely on a lot are the Evanston Environment Board, which is comes to us with really solid recommendations that we then can implement in an ordinance. I also happen to be the council liaison on the Housing and Homelessness Commission, and I do think there's a lot of expertise there that's very helpful. Another source of really solid information are some of the community organizations that are really specialized in particular issues. And for example, Joining Forces is just an amazing fount of really helpful information and forward thinking that can really be useful to us as we move forward with developing our affordable housing plan for Evanston. And I would also point to Citizens Greener Government, Greener Evanston, which can really come to us with some important ideas to help implement CARP, our climate action plan. And so these are some really existing solid organizations in the community that I think we should be open to listening to and taking their.
Thank you. Candidate Trippi?
One of the personal skills that I'll bring to the council is my ability to connect people across this community and lean on our resources that we have. One of the things that I love most about living in Evanston is the number of different opinions there are on every issue. You will find that if you gather 100 Evanstonians in a room, you will have 105 opinions. And I think that's a strength. I think that as long as we are willing to build relationships, bring more people to the table and to the meetings, either via Zoom or in person, by going out into the community, using the resources and the expertise that we have in this community is the greatest strength that we as city leaders are going to be able to tap in making our decisions. And I promise that I will make my decisions by listening to as many sides of the conversation as are present, as I am able to access, and then listening for common ideas, common ground, and coming to a consensus. That's the only way that leadership can work.
Thank you. Candidate Goldring?
Thank you. Now I get to say what Mary said. I was last, so I agree with everybody else. I agree that we should start listening to our boards and commissions, and the boards and commissions traditionally seem to have been people who agree with the person who appoints them, the mayor. I would encourage our new mayor to appoint people with different perspectives, like, for example, Citizens Network of Protection, that has been, seems to be more currently an adversarial relationship with the city. You appoint people with different opinions that haven't always agreed with you. I would also, we live in this great university town, so we could use the source of information is Northwestern. There's people, professors there. And I would also encourage us to look at other cities that are leading in areas that are important to us. Like there's other cities that have developed equity frameworks, for example, other cities that are leading on environmental issues, in ways that we haven't. So I would encourage us to partner as a council. I would look to partner with some of the people who have gone before us.
Thank you. Our next question. What are your ideas to fill empty storefronts and support local small businesses, including addressing high rents? We will start with Alderperson Revel.
Well, what's really interesting is as we're meeting here tonight, the Economic Development Committee is having a really interesting meeting where they're talking about several exciting initiatives, one of which I think could really be helpful to smaller businesses. The owner of the the building that has the Varsity Theater in it has acquired the property across the alley from that building and is proposing to create, basically renovate Bookman's Alley and make that space available then to for small retail or any kind of shops, but those would be lower rent spaces for newer businesses to get a good start. There are just a number of really exciting initiatives. I think that our Economic Development Committee and our Economic Development staff are putting together to help really our business community thrive and rebound after the pandemic. We're fortunate that we do have just a lot going for us in Evanston with the public transit that we have for the downtown, the university and all of its resources, and all those things together make us a very attractive place for businesses to locate. And we need to do everything we can to bring those newer businesses into Evanston and provide support, small business loans and entrepreneurial assistance to our smaller businesses.
Thank you. Candidate Rosinski.
I think you touched on a lot of different things, and we do have to work with the Economic Development Committee and ask them to be reaching out to our surrounding communities and see what they're doing to be successful. I know as you go up and down the shore, you'll see different things going on the streets with COVID, with little glass houses and a lot of outdoor stuff going on. I think with Evanston, in addition to working just here, we need to bring people here. And I think we need to increase our reputation for being a really friendly, welcoming committee. I've talked about this before. We need to maybe offer free parking and make sure everyone around us knows that, and we could do tax incentives for the rents to help the landlords be able to charge less to our small businesses. We have to support our small businesses because that supports our local neighborhoods, who then helps our tax base. So we need to keep those guys here. And I think we can bring other people, again, to all of our small districts, and they will help our economic development. They'll help the businesses, and they'll help the landlords maintain. But I think we have to keep reaching out and see who's doing what and who's doing it well and bring it to our town. I don't have a magic, bullet on this one. I think it's just going to be a collaborative effort of ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderperson Suffredin.
Particularly in the 6th Ward, our business district, which is basically Ewing West, has survived this pretty well. But there's always issues with parking, taxes, and fees. Along the lines of what was said by Mary, we need to make sure that our parking policies are supportive of our business, particularly up here where we're competing with the free parking in Wilmette and the free parking in Skokie. As far as downtown, which is going to be our real challenge, since the large retailers aren't likely to return, how do we make it an appealing place to be and spend time? Our economic development staff, which Alderman Ravel alluded to his meeting right now, I think they need to be turned loose. And that's one of the things that we talked about, holding a city manager accountable. I think they need to be freed up to do more. We are underutilizing their talents. We need to think about events, things we can do to bring people downtown. I had a good discussion today about public restroom facilities with a group of clergy who are concerned about that, particularly for vulnerable people. But when you think about the stores that have left, our only real public bathroom is at the library right now, and that's not something that's sustainable if we're going to have people come downtown and spend time and take part in experiences, which is something that they can't replicate at Old Orchard or in another retail district. So I think in terms of our downtown, we need to think about how to get people to come down there. Parking is always an issue. I'd like us to reduce parking fees or offer, you know, a validation if you spend a certain amount of money. I will trade sales tax revenue for parking revenue, especially as we come out of this pandemic and we need to get people downtown. And I think really the most important thing is that we think outside the box and be really creative and do things that are unique to
Time.
Evanston.
Thank you. Candidate Nusma.
Thank you. Economic development is really an important question for the Fourth Ward, because not only do we have a portion of the downtown business district, we've also got 3 unique business districts in Main Street, on Dempster, and on Davis Street. So what I think we should do is play to our strengths and not compete with the big box stores, not compete with the online retailers, but support small, local, unique businesses that will bring people into Evanston. And I think one of the ways we can do that is to promote Evanston as a destination for arts and entertainment. Certainly we have a lot of restaurants that are going to need, if the ones that managed to survive COVID are going to need some support going forward. We've got the Northlight Theater hopefully coming back to the Fourth Ward when we get through this. And so playing to our strengths as an arts and entertainment destination, I think, is something I would like to play up. Let's talk about art fairs. Let's talk about street fairs, specifically in the Fourth Ward. We lost the Custer Street Fair. I'd like to bring that back. It's a good way of bringing in some outside folks to spend some money. I'd like to close down some streets, maybe not permanently, but on a longer term basis, so we can do more outdoor dining, make Evanston shopping areas more pedestrian friendly, bring in some money that way. And I want to make sure that not only we're working with the economic development staff, but also the existing organizations like the Chamber of Commerce, like Downtown Evanston, Main Dempster Mile. There's a lot of creative, smart folks already working on this problem. And to pick up on what Alderman Suffredin said, we just need to turn them loose.
Thank you. Candidate Goldring.
Thanks. Yeah, I echo a lot of what Jonathan said. I've heard a lot of, as I'm walking around, I heard a lot of people complain about parking. But one of the things, that's kind of a disconnect with our, CART goals in terms of having fewer people drive. So we need to make the city more, continue to make the city more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. We have unused parking garages. People talk a lot about how we compete with Old Orchard, but at Old Orchard you can't park right in front of a store. You have to park in the lot and then walk. So, obviously for residents who are elderly or disabled, we would have places to park in front of stores. But I think in general we need to make a more vibrant downtown, like much more pedestrian friendly. And the other thing is that we need to support our residents as they come out of COVID. I mean, people here, if people aren't, the stores aren't going to survive if people don't have money to spend. So we definitely need to continue to support our residents with, that have lost their jobs and are unable to, have any kind of disposable income to frequent the restaurants and street fairs and things that we have. So we need to make sure that people are supported.
Thank you. Candidate Trippi.
The character of our small business districts and our downtown are unique to Evanston, and it is a destination place for the North Shore and for people on the north side of Chicago. We have to know and support those businesses to thrive again after this terrible pandemic. One of the things we really have to do first is to talk to those small business owners. My mom owned a small gift shop first on Main Street and then in downtown Evanston for 30 years. And she never once was approached either by a council member, a member of the city staff, or anyone on the Economic Development Committee to ask her what she needed in order for her business to thrive. I think that probably there's different answers for different business owners. Some would like relief from parking fees. Some might like relief from their rent for a certain number of months. Some may need some other type of tax incentive. Some may just need us to plan when we'll be tearing up the street in front of their store or tearing up and redoing the sidewalks. We don't know until we talk to and listen to our small business and minority-owned business owners. They can tell us what they need, and we can take that to the experts and design a plan that is going to benefit all of us and make Evanston the destination shopping place that it will be.
Thank you. Our next question, how do you plan to increase support for the Black LGBTQI residents in Evanston? We'll start with candidate Trippi.
One of the things that I, again, love most about this community is our progressive, open, and accepting expectations for all our schools, our public leaders. All in our community need to feel welcome, and we need to support them. And I think in the Evanston that we aspire to be, all of those people do feel supported. But in reality, we need to do more. We are incredibly wealthy in the number of not-for-profit agencies in this town that are taking a specific look at how best to support those in our community who need that type of support. We as a community need to aspire to do better than what we're doing right now. And I know that we have the mindset to do that. And I, as a leader, will take that on as a responsibility as being a leader here.
Thank you. Candidate Goldring.
Thanks. Well, the fact that the question was asked in the first place tells me that we aren't doing enough to support our Black LGBTQ residents. I think we need to look, take a comprehensive review of our policies in terms of, equity in general. Obviously, we've talked about that. We have a commitment to an equity lens, but we haven't really been fulfilling that commitment. But in terms of, things I can think about are just the language that we use in our city codes and policies. Is that affirming? Look at our healthcare policies. Is that equitable for the LGBTQ community? Just doing a comprehensive view in that review in that way. And that way we could, and there are also leaders in that community, in the LGBTQ community that live in Evanston, and we consult with them as far as other things that they might be needing.
Thank you. Candidate Nusma.
As with every issue, I think engagement, accessibility, and transparency are critical. Especially for me as a middle-aged straight white guy, when it comes to issues of race or LGBTQ, the most important thing I can do is to listen and learn, and if necessary, unlearn what I need to unlearn. But specific to how we can support as a community, what Evanston can do to support the Black community, I'm not sure we're going to talk about reparations in more detail later, but I am certainly committed to enacting the recommendations of the reparations subcommittee as long as that committee is is open and transparent in their process, and that folks making those decisions are the Black residents who have been affected by systemic racism throughout the years. In terms of our LGBTQ community, I think one thing we can do is to appoint a new liaison to the city. The city website still lists Erica Storley as the LGBTQ liaison. I am presuming that is left over from prior to her being promoted to full-time city manager. So I think we're probably due for a change there. How about a pride parade in Evanston or Juneteenth parade? I like what Kimon Hendricks has done with Evanston Present and Future. So these are good ways to show support for those communities, and maybe also do some economic development at the same time. In all cases, though, I think we as community leaders, and if we're lucky enough to be elected to the city council, need to use our moral authority to call out what's wrong, name what's wrong, and stand up for what's right.
Thank you. Alderperson Sufferton.
So yeah, I'll echo what Diane said. I mean, the fact that the question is being asked is evidence that we're not doing enough. And then I'll also say the fact that the question is being asked in this forum, and it's not something that I've been asked directly in my time on the city council, demonstrates that I'm not doing enough to be accessible for questions like that. So, clearly we need to make sure that Evanston is a place where people feel welcome, and that's more than just policy. It goes to your question before about the incidents of vandalism in our ward. It's not something that we can write with words, it's something we need to live. I will point out to Jonathan that we intended to have a Pride Festival and it was COVIDed. And I say that to say that we're, not to correct you, Jonathan, but to point out that we're moving in the right direction. One of the big things about our downtown is that we need that to be the space where people feel comfortable. I know the Custom Street Fair is traditionally in Southeast Evanston, but as that's reimagined and hopefully rekindled by a new group, that's something that we need to look at. We need everyone to feel comfortable in every part of town. Our parades and celebrations need to be inclusive, and that means geographically inclusive too. So, I know the Equity and Empowerment Commission is going to make a report to the Rules Committee in March. They'll have a 2-year set of goals. This will likely be part of it, and that goes to what we started talking about, which is how do we hold the city manager accountable? How do we hold the next council accountable? How do we make sure the next council and mayor have measurable goals that they achieve in their 4-year term? And I think this falls under that. But clearly the fact that the question's asked means we're not doing enough.
Thank you. Candidate Rosinski.
I think actually that's right. The fact that it is being asked is indicative that a lot needs to be done. I don't know if having a group, a commission alone is enough, but I think we need to have leaders from all of the communities that are the LGBTQ and Black community tell us what we need. I think Mr. Nussbaum brought up a really good point in that not only do we need to educate ourselves as to what is necessary and listen and be accessible, but we need to unlearn what we have learned in the past. I can't pretend to say I know what's going to be the right answer, but I will promise to listen and work towards something that makes this city a very much more open and welcoming community for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you. And Alderperson Ravel.
Yes. And I get to go last. I really appreciate the comments of my colleagues on this panel. I agree with basically the sentiment of everybody. One thing that we could do that hasn't been mentioned is the city could reach out to our school districts and see, are there ways in which the city can be helpful to the school districts as they try to be supportive to their students who may be needing support on these kinds of issues. So I agree. I'm not the person to have the answers. I'm interested in learning more. I know that we have a Deputy Chief Secluti is the liaison for LGBTQ issues for the police department. And as Jonathan mentioned, I guess we need a new, someone from the city to be identified in that position as well. So we have sort of placeholders for these issues, but the question is, are we really having the kinds of conversations that we need to have? So I think this discussion tonight has really raised the profile of this issue, and we need to be making progress on that in the next 4 years.
Thank you. How will you promote racial equity while mitigating hostility and systemic racism? We'll start with candidate Rosinski.
Well, I think that starts with our city council strategic policies. And I think it just has to be an integral element of that. I think it's our vision. It's how we see every decision we make in this city, and we talk about it, and we look, and we create a measure of what that means in every department. I think, I was looking at our community goals, and they seem a little bit topsy-turvy, because I think the equity aspect is all the way down here, and I think it needs to be at the top. So in terms of how I would promote it, I would start with that. And then I would ask for reaching out to community leaders to have them come and voice what they think are important, where we're lacking, and how we can improve, and open it up for every aspect of our city. I think it starts with our plan, and I think it starts with discussion. And then we have to have action based on that. I think the thing is, in this town, I've seen so many big discussions and big roundtables, and then nothing happens, or nothing substantial happens, or somehow that gets lost. I want us to make a decision, make a plan with measurable, and when we'll know we're successful when we've met something, and then we will be more successful in the next plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderperson Revelle.
Well, I think it's important for us to be having this conversation at the city council level and with city staff, but I think we want to make sure that we're having this conversation with our community as a whole, because we need to make sure that there's, to the extent that there are differences of opinion about whether anything is needed on along these lines, I think if we have the conversation with our residents, we can make sure that they're in concert with us as we try to make progress on equity issues. I think the work that we've seen happen with our reparations subcommittee is really instructive. Dino Robinson and working with the Evanston History Center have put together just an amazing document that shows the racial disparities in our policies and practices in our history, and how they have shaped our community today, and provide the basis for our reparations program. So we need to make sure that our community as a whole understands our history and why we need to make the kinds of changes that we're poised to be making with our reparations fund.
Thank you. Alderperson Sufferton.
Sure. So I think, again, this is something that the Equity and Power Commission is going to come to the council with in March, and it's something that we need the next council and mayor to implement immediately in terms of how we do our ordinances, how we approach every decision in terms of purchasing and spending money. I think, the city manager has a role to play in hiring and firing decisions. We saw the fallout from a very poorly received personnel choice and the amount of distrust that created among everyone in the community, and frankly the amount of inefficiency it brought to our meetings. We spent 3 meetings on this issue, and it had an unfortunate resolution. We're going to have to institute a racial equity impact analysis on all of our decisions in the next council. I think that's something that we need to be very specific about. It needs to be written into every staff memo on any of the ordinances we vote on. We really need to demonstrate in more than just words and platitudes what we're about in terms of how we're going to make sure that the decisions that this council makes and the money that we spend is done with a view towards racial impact and improving the relations in our community, because we're all in this thing together. And as we get through the next 4 years post-COVID, we're going to need to break up a lot of past practices and change a lot of things that we've been accustomed to in Evanston.
Thank you. Candidate Trippi. You're still muted.
There we go. We've come a long way in Evanston on our journey toward equity. We have taken the steps of actually hiring a city staff member to serve as an accountability partner to the city staff and to the council and the mayor. But we still have a very long way to go. One of the places we need to start is by educating our community about our history and the inequities that have been built into our structures from the day we were founded. We have to own that history and we have to repair that history. I am fully in support of these racial and equity impact statements that should be included in every aspect of our city government at the council level, all the way down through the decisions made by any city staff member that impacts the citizens of this town. The reparations subcommittee is a shining star. We are light years ahead of so many communities that are choosing to follow us in creating their own reparations programs. And I can't thank Alderman Ruth Simmons enough for her leadership on that particular issue. And I look forward to working with that reparations subcommittee as they develop more plans for how to help us to mitigate some of that history that we need to learn.
Thank you. Candidate Goldring.
Thanks for this question. First of all, we need to define what we mean by racial equity. Everyone talks about racial equity, but I think we need an actual written definition. Racial equity is when race is no longer a determining factor in socioeconomic outcome. And we are really far from that in Evanston. I've seen it when I've been delivering meals to homebound seniors. We started with about 200 meals, and out of those 200 homes, 198 were people of color. And so that is not an accident. That is not an accident. That was a result of intentional policies that City of Evanston, with redlining, et cetera, which other people have talked about. So we need to undo those. And again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There are other communities. We are a member of GARE, which is an association of governments across the country that have been doing racial equity work. And some of them have developed actual racial equity lens tools by which every policy that the city puts forward is analyzed. And we don't have to start from scratch. We can become much more active. We're already a member of GARE. We can become much more active in and use those, all of the learnings that other cities that are far, far ahead of us in that, like St. Paul, Minnesota. There's lists of them, and there's so many resources. I actually think we're pretty far from, what we claim to be in terms of racial equity in the city. I've spoken with someone on the Equity and Empowerment Commission, and I will not name their name, and if they might be watching, and that person said, I can't say what they said.
Thank you. Candidate Nusma.
Thank you. At the risk of repeating myself, I'll pound the drum again of accessibility, engagement, and transparency. And picking up on an answer to a previous question, just emphasize the fact that I, as an alderman, have to listen and learn and unlearn. And the folks that I need to be listening to here are the voices of the Black and Brown Evanston residents who have been impacted by structural racism and inequality. And believe them, believe what they say, and follow their guidance to help right any wrongs. I like that Diane said we should be defining equity, and I agree with that. I've been asked to define equity, and I struggle to answer that question simply. And I've come to realize it's really a question, more of a question for me to be asking than a question for me to answer. And that gets to listening to the folks that have been affected by this. We have an anti-racism resolution and an environmental justice resolution at the city level. Those are great first steps, but we need to build on those with ordinances that actually have teeth. And as far as promoting racial equity within our community, a lot of that work has to start with children at the schools, and this is not the forum for that, so we won't get into that right now. But we need to continue to support the work of the Equity and Empowerment Commission, anti-racism training for city staff and elected officials, supporting Black-owned businesses. I think I mentioned the Juneteenth celebration before. I'm not sure if we're going to, get into public safety and a discussion of defund the police separately, but that definitely needs to be a part of the discussion here. And we need to ensure that there are Black people and people of color represented at every level of city government, building, starting with the community, but then on the boards and commissions. And city staff as well as elected officials. Thank you.
Thank you. You were actually reading my mind. My next question is, what do you think about defunding the police, and how would you bring about police accountability? We'll start with you, Candidate Nusma.
Well, I support a public safety budget that accurately reflects the values of our community. But when we're talking about police accountability, I really think of three things. I think of structure, I think of oversight, and I think of transparency. And so structure, that includes the budget and spending less money on militarized police and more on social services, youth programs, job services, mental health. I support training and recruitment that emphasize soft skills like de-escalation and restorative practices over skills like marksmanship. And community policing models are something I would like to investigate more further, and putting incentives in place so Evanston police officers can live in Evanston, I think would be a good thing. In terms of oversight, I think civilian oversight is crucial, and true civilians, not stacking the deck with former or current law enforcement officials from different jurisdictions. I think the role of the CPRC should be expanded, and I think they should be empowered. I'm not so much hung up on whether they should be appointed or elected. I think there are ways to achieve an empowered and meaningful CPRC without electing them to that role. And in terms of transparency, I'd like to move the FOIA responsibility back to the city clerk and make more data regularly available without having to go through the FOIA process. And by data, I'm not just talking about a data dump. I'm not saying here's 100,000 oysters, you look through them and find the pearl of knowledge that you're looking for. I'd like to have that data sorted and sifted and analyzed in a way that it makes sense. So we don't have to rely on those data guys over at CNP to do that work for us. Thanks.
Thank you. Candidate Trippi.
Thank you for this question. I too have to say that I support a public safety budget that reflects the values of our community, but we need to define what those values are. And we need to delineate those to our police chief and to our police force. I believe strongly that we need to create incentives for Evanston kids to become Evanston cops and to make it possible for Evanston police officers to live in this community so that they do understand what the mores of this community, what we expect of our police, and what types of behaviors we absolutely will not tolerate. I think if you grow up here, you raise a family here, you have a better understanding of the people that you are responsible for. We all want the same thing. We want a safe community. We don't want to worry about our physical safety, our property safety. We do need a police force that takes care of those things, but we do not need a police force that harasses our children, creates havoc with our mentally ill, hassle our homeless people. That is not what the police are for. We are, again, as I say, absolutely wealthy with not-for-profit organizations that would willingly, with some city funding, take on the responsibilities for answering those calls for help in those specific situations with an expertise that the police can never have. We need to make sure that the right people are answering the right calls. And that's the expectation of this community. We need to hold our police officers to that and the rest of our community to step up and take responsibility to fill those roles.
Thank you. Alderperson Revelle.
Well, starting with the budget question, I do support our reducing the amount of city funding that goes to the police department. Currently, it's roughly a third of our general operating fund budget, and that we should be able to be a safe community with a smaller police budget. I'm pleased that we are moving forward with an alternative crisis response program. We'll be coming to Human Services next week with a draft of what that program will look like. As I've been working on this subcommittee with Alderman Fleming, I've become even more aware of the really significant need for more mental health services in our community. And I'm glad to think that we'll be meeting those needs somewhat with this alternative response program, but we need to be able to put more city resources, not only into this program going forward, but just into our mental health services in general. I think as we move forward with trying to reduce the police budget, we need to have a conversation, a community conversation about what level of policing the community needs and wants, because it's fine and well to say, well, let's cut the police budget, let's get rid of X number of police officers, but we need to do it in a way in concert with the views of our community as to what everybody needs and wants. And on that particular point, we had an outside organization that did an assessment of our police department a couple of years ago, and in terms of ways to make it more efficient. And they made 6 recommendations, 5 of which we have implemented, but the 6th recommendation we have not yet implemented, and it called for a staffing study. Because right now what happens is we pretty much roll from year to year with the same level of staffing. So if we could, okay.
Thank you. Candidate Goring.
Thanks. I do support reallocating funds from the police department to health and human services and economic development and youth services in particular. I think that we need or an independent oversight committee that is not appointed by the mayor. So real, true, independent citizens. I think we also need better data. For example, I was looking on the website just trying to figure out the crime or what was going on in the 4th ward, and it said that there was over 9,000 police incidents in the 4th, or police activities in the 4th ward, and that just didn't jive with what I had been reading on other reports. And so I questioned it, and turns out a police activity is any interaction with the police. And since the police department is in the 4th ward, all those activities are included in that data. So that is not helpful for me or any alderperson in the 4th ward to figure out what's going on in there. So we should have a much more transparent data from the police. But in general, policing and safety are not equal. Other communities like, Lake Forest, you don't say Lake Forest is safe because it's over-policed. It's because people in Lake Forest have the resources that they need to survive and to thrive. They have a good education, they have good health care, they have adequate resources, they have food, and we're seeing now, we need to start thinking more in terms of public safety in those terms. I really like what Alderman Fleming has been doing. She has been having.
Thank you. Candidate Rosinski?
I think that one thing we need to do is define what public safety is and what it's not. And just, I think that the reallocation of funds is critical to being able to use funds effectively and meet the needs that we have in this community for good policing. I think that we have the mental issues that we need to deal with. So police aren't going to necessarily help that matter. So sending those calls to people in the health cares would be better. And the youth services, I agree, does need to be strengthened up and worked on. I'd like to work at things on a lower level. I don't think we need to be over policing. And the FOIA department, in terms of transparency, should go back to where it was before at the city clerks. As far as with the police itself, I would like to see training in the city and hourly type basis, not a full day training that takes the officers out of the city. And I think that there has been talk, I think, in the department about doing more training about what is the psychology of someone who might be homeless? What is the psychology of someone who's experiencing maybe a mental break with, and so we don't need to be going and arresting them. We need to be understanding where they're coming from. So that's a huge thing. And I think we need more community involvement. And I'm so proud of Betty Esther. And, she's just been on this for years and years and years. And the CNP has taken a position now of authority, of, credibility. And she's been talking to that. And we need to listen to people like Betty on this. So that's kind of all over the place, because I think we all agree, policing, we don't need to have too much militarization.
Thank you. And last but not least, Alderperson Suffredin.
Thank you. So I have a little bit of a broken record here, but this is something that the next council can handle in their 4-year term. The collective bargaining agreement with the police is up during the next 4 years. If we're going to change our police budget, it's going to require a reduction in police personnel. And if we're going to do that, we need to be very smart and intentional about it, because to Alderman Ravel's point, we have not done a staffing study, so we don't know what a baseline staffing level is. To Katie Tribby's point, it's important that we get quality people and that they feel like Evanston is a place where they can grow in their careers and raise families. And if we want to have people who grow up here, want to have careers as police here, it needs to be an appealing place for them to work. To some of the recent events that we've had, particularly on Halloween, if we have a reduction in staff, we're inviting NIPAS into Evanston more frequently. And that's something that I don't know is in our best interest, between the lack of accountability and some of the other issues that are raised. I mean, I think we want to police ourselves to the greatest extent possible. On Monday, the council approved a $300,000 contract with a private security firm to patrol the garages and the Civic Center. And I think that's another concern, is if we take police functions and have them done by private securities, we haven't really changed the model of enforcement. And we haven't moved towards what I think our goal is in terms of alternative response models. And so we have to be really careful on this, and we need to make that an initial priority. And I think one thing that I will say that is a concern, just in the tone, not just of this conversation, but I've heard it on a lot of things, is that anybody who's appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council is instantly suspect. We need to get away from that mentality, and that's the role of the council and the mayor to provide that credibility. I understand where it comes from. But I mean, we're all members of the same community, and we need to really work on that. And I think, to Katie's point, we would be better served by having people who are members of this community policing it as well.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. I want to thank all the candidates for speaking on the forum, all the viewers for being here. I know that we ran over a little, so I appreciate you being patient with us. Please tune back in tomorrow at 6 for our last forum. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you, Janitha.
Thank you,
No
Janitha.
problem.
Thank you, everybody else.
Thanks, everybody.